My name's Short Mike By, and I'm an alcoholic. And through the grace of God and His gift to me of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, lovingly and caringly delivered to me by people like you in rooms like this, I've not found it necessary or desirable to take a drink or a substitute drug, with the exception of nicotine, caffeine, and sugar, since October 7th, 1985. And for that, I'm eternally and profoundly grateful. I have a home group. It's the Myrtle Beach 12 and 12 group. Strangely enough, we meet in Myrtle Beach. Who'd have thought that? We meet on Mondays at 5:30 and on Saturdays at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we have a men's meeting at the Senior Citizen Center at 6 o'clock on Tuesday, and a women's meeting at the Alano Club on 67th Avenue at 5:30 on Thursday. So if you happen to be in Myrtle Beach, and you can happen to find your way to the Alano Club, which is on 67th Street right behind the funeral home, in case you want to drink, you can just stop off there. And come and join us. You'll find a small but enthusiastic group of drunks. And we'd love to have you come share your experience, strength, and hope with us, because God knows we need it. I have a sponsor, he has a sponsor, etc., etc. I sponsor people. I'm privileged enough to do that. Occasionally I force them to drive 2.5 hours with me. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff's a compulsive talker. And we left Myrtle Beach and he started talking and I rolled down the window. And we got here and he quit talking and I rolled the window up. Let's get me drunk. I come from an alcoholic family. You shake my family tree, drunks fall out. Everybody in my family is alcoholic. Mother, father, sisters, grandparents. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, died in 1952 or 3 in Butner under the belladonna treatment for alcoholism in Butner up by Raleigh. My maternal grandparents are alcoholics. My maternal grandmother died in 1932 from a self-administered, non-prescribed dose of medical morphine. It just rages through my family. And we're all alcoholics. I mean, we're not all alcoholics. I have 2 cousins who aren't alcoholics. We made them marry drunk so they'd fit in at family gatherings. They're the Al-Anons. Nobody talks to them. They have to go to the other corner of the room. And I can say that because almost all of my family members at one time or another have come into these rooms. Some very successfully and some not so successfully. But we've all been in and out of these rooms for years and years and years. I was loved and adored by my family. I can't say that I was abused. I mean, it was chaotic. It was crazy. You know, we'd gather for family gatherings. Strong drink would be taken. Harsh words would be exchanged. Punches would be thrown. Valuable antiques would be smashed. And then we all hug each other and talk about how much we loved each other. And, you know, I know people who grew up in that kind of chaos and they scarred them. They hated it. Proof I'm an alcoholic is I loved it. I thought it was great. You know, I couldn't wait. You know, I'm 18 years old. My fondest ambition is to get old enough to get drunk, cuss somebody out, smack them upside the head, break something they care about, and then hug them and tell them how much I loved them. Honest to God, the first time I got married, we had this nice, polite reception at the country club. And then we all went back to Mama's and Daddy's house for the real party. And my first wife keeps tugging on my arm saying, come on, we got to go on our honeymoon, we got to go. And I said, no, can't leave yet, the fight hasn't started. And finally she made me leave. A week later I get back and I go and I see some of my cousins and they said, oh God, you missed it, it was just the greatest fight in the whole wide world. And I turned into my new wife and I said, see, I told you we left too soon. I loved my family and they adored me. I mean, we're Irish descent and we're Southern, and I was a cute little red-headed kid with sparkly blue eyes and a mouthful of blarney. I was adorable. And they loved me to pieces. I'm the only grandson of my grandfather with a by last name. And I grew up like the little Prince of Connemara. I mean, both my sisters were older than me. I was their favorite toy. You know, they took me everywhere, you know. Oh, we're going to take a little, then I got to be 6 or 7 and they got really upset with me because I was a pain in the neck. But they adored me. And I grew up terrified. I grew up absolutely gripped with fear every minute of every day. And I didn't know why until I got here. And when I got here, this program and you people helped me figure out that what I was most afraid of was that you would find out what was going on inside of me. See, I was treated like the little Prince of Connemara, and I knew I didn't have what it takes to be the little prince, let alone get to be the king. And I was terrified. And I was scared that you would find that out. And then you would take all that love and all that attention and all that affirmation that I so desperately needed and give it to somebody else. And so I did what most alcoholics do. You know, I learned how to give you what you want. I can walk into any room, anywhere, with any number of people. And in 5 minutes, I can tell what you want out of me and I can give it right back to you. My friend Sean says it's like walking around with a mirror in front of your face. You just reflect back what you get. Now, the only problem with that is, have you ever seen the back of a mirror? It ain't nothing but black. And that's what was going on inside of me. So by the time I was 13 years old, I learned to lie, cheat, steal, shuck, jive, con, you know, be whatever you want me to be and hustle my way through life. You know, I did all the right things. I got real good grades. I knew I wasn't smart. I did it with smoke and mirrors, I was sure. I was a halfway decent athlete. I knew I wasn't very coordinated. I did it with smoke and mirrors. And if I made one mistake, that's all I could think about. The real me came out. So I'm 13 years old. I'm terrified. I'm shucking and conning. I know I am. I'm lying. I'm practicing in front of the mirror. You know, Molly's forgotten his. Thanks for the introduction, Molly. He forgot to tell you how humble I am. Well, you know when you're humble and nobody notices, it's really a drag. You know, I first got here, I used to stand in front of the mirror and practice and looking humble, so you'd know that. But I'm practicing stuff in my head, and I got all the isms of alcoholism. At 13 years old, I found the first of the 2 cures I know for that. And the first cure is alcohol. Happened in a bark shed outside of a house in Whitmire, South Carolina. It was Sunday supper. My great Uncle Watts stood up and looked at my father and said, "Buster, it's time for us to go for a walk." It was fine. And then he said, "It's time for the boy." That was me. I was known as the boy. I don't know who the other males in my family were, but I was the boy. He said, "Time for the boy to come along." And Daddy looked at me and said, "Come on, buddy." And all the women at the house sort of tissed, you know, like Southern women do, because they didn't like it. But we went on our walk. We walked 25 feet out the back door, turned left into a bark shed. And I thought, that's an awful short walk. We sat down on some crates, and my great uncle reached down behind one of them and pulled out a bottle of clear white liquid. I had no idea what it was. He pulled out 2 rum crook cigars. He gave one to my daddy and one to himself. They lit them. Uncle Watts took the top off the bottle. He drank some of it. He went, slammed his foot down and said something real smart. He and Daddy talked for a while, and he handed the bottle to Daddy, and Daddy took a slug off that bottle and went, and he said something real smart. Now, I'm a chameleon. I know how to fit in. And I figure out real fast, I don't know what this is about, but you take whatever's in that bottle, you drink some of it, you go, and you say something real smart. So like any good alcoholic, I'm creating the smart thing I'm going to say and practicing it in my head. You know how we do. And they handed me the bottle, and I took a swallow off that stuff, and I tried with everything in my body to go, and say my smart thing. And it came out something like, oh! It seems that what was in that bottle was creek liquor that my Uncle Watts had made up all by himself down in the woods. And he didn't cut it with a whole lot of water. I gave the bottle back to my Uncle Watts, and really nothing happened. I mean, you know, I didn't have any great spiritual revelations or anything like that. I just kind of, oh, that's nice. I choked and gagged. I did think two things. First thing I thought was I was never going to drink any of that stuff again. And the second thing I thought is maybe they figured out I didn't have what it takes to be the little prince, and they decided to poison me and bury me in the woods outside of a bark shed in Whitmire, South Carolina. And then when somebody asked, say, we don't know, he just had a couple of drinks and wandered off, which happened a lot later on. I'd have a couple of drinks and wander off. But one thing that did happen was that while they were talking and saying their smart things and drinking on the bottle, I got a little tickle down in my tummy. Never had it before. And I don't know if this works for the women, but I know it works for the guys. It's a lot like the first time you kissed a girl. You don't know what you did. You have no idea if you did it right, but you can't wait to do it again and see what happens next. And the bottle came back around, and I poured as much of that stuff as I could down my throat. Changed my mind about not drinking. It took me 10 minutes to change my mind. And I gagged and I coughed and stuff came out my ears and nose, and it wasn't pretty. And I sat there and I waited. And now, you know, we have people with a period of social drinking, instant alcoholics and people with social drinking. I had a period of social drinking. It lasted 10 minutes. Closest I've come to a social drink since then is somebody say, I think I'll have a drink, and I say, so shall I. I'm telling you, that liquor hit my stomach and came out through my body and tingled every nerve I had. And for the first time in 13 years, I was no longer afraid. I was a man among men. I was a little prince of Connemara, by God. And I looked over at the king and thought, you know, if you don't retire pretty soon, I might just stage a coup. Because, as Bill says in the book, I have arrived. That second drink fixed everything that was ever wrong with me. I was smart. I was a good athlete. I was charming and clever and wonderful. My friend Cliff says that any good alcoholic, after 10 minutes of drinking, gets 8 minutes of okay. And that was my first okay. The way I describe it is, it's that feeling that we all get sometimes where you go, oh, I got this. And for the first time in my life, I could take a breath and I got this. They wouldn't let me have a third drink. Got my first alcoholic resentment. Kept it for 20 years. Poor Uncle Watts died. I went to his funeral and I looked at him and I said, selfish, self-centered, won't give me a third drink. He might have known. Didn't drink again until about 9 months later. My sisters had a party. They're older than I, 6 and 7 years. I was 14, they were 20, 21. My parents were out of town. They had all their friends, you know, all the guys. I'll date myself. All the cool guys drove cars like the Corvair convertibles, and all the women with the bumps in the right places. And I was anxious and I was nervous and I had to get okay. And I did real well in the beginning of the party. I had a couple of drinks. I impressed the guys with my vast array of knowledge on a variety of subjects. I charmed all the women with my clever repartee, and then I vomited all over everybody. Decided I needed some fresh air, went outside, borrowed my daddy's brand new Gran Turismo Hawk automobile that he loved better than anything, including the Little Prince of Connemara. 14 years old, drunk, drove it around the neighborhood with the utmost of caution and carefully parked it in the creek in front of our house. Went upstairs, passed out, got up the next morning, walked downstairs, looked at my sisters and said, when are we going to have another party? And they said, if we have anything to do with it, you'll never have another party. And then my younger sister looked at me and said words that were prophetic. She said, you know, when you drink, you're worse than Daddy. And I had to go, you had to go something be worse than Daddy when you drank. I began a career of the next 25 years of raging alcoholism, substituted by some outside issues. Now, I'm not going to do a long, stupid drunk-a-log. We all know how to drink. We all know the same stupid, ridiculous, absurd things that we do when we're drunk. So I was a blackout drinker and traveling drunk. That's a bad combination. My three favorite questions are, who are you, where are we, and what are we doing here? I woke up too many times in a bed, feel a body next to me, and prayed that prayer that every drunk has prayed. You know, dear God, I don't care how old or how ugly, just please make it a woman. Y'all laugh, but we get drunk, you know, all bets are off, you know. I don't know what I'm doing. I went to college, I graduated. Didn't have a whole lot to do with my life, couldn't figure out what I was going to do with my life, and I'd met a Presbyterian preacher, and he told me I ought to go to seminary. And I figured, well, I can hang out there for a year. They have a Rockefeller scholarship, and it pays for everything. You see if it's right for you. And I thought, well, I kind of hang out in seminary and figure out what I'm going to do with my life. Somehow I kept going. I mean, I went a year and I still hadn't figured it out. So I went another year and I still hadn't figured it out. And I went a third year and they made me graduate. You know, it was just really unfortunate because I had to stay there my whole life. Got in trouble drinking in seminary. Passed out in the doorway of the chapel once in my skivvies. Didn't wake up before chapel the next morning. That's how I got to my first AA meeting. I was invited to the office of the dean, and he suggested, you know how they suggest you go to A&A? You know, well, he suggested I go to A&A, and I thought, okay. And next week, it was Wednesday, I found a meeting on the other side of town just in case I ran into anybody I knew. I didn't know anybody in town except at school, but just in case. Got in the car, stopped at 7-Eleven, got a six-pack because it was a 3-beer drive there and a 3-beer drive back. Went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You all were very nice. You welcomed me and shook my hand, and you asked me what I was doing there, and I told you the truth. I said, you know, I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, and they suggested that I go to an AA meeting in case I ever ran into anybody in one of my parishes with a drinking problem. I could tell them where to go. After the meeting, a guy named John put his arm around me as we walked out, and he said, Mike, you know, we have a God-given program here. And I said, yes. And he said, we have 12 God-given steps that perform miracles in people's lives. And I said, yes, I know that, John, because my whole family been going in and out of AA forever. He said, you know, but we find those steps work a whole lot better if you don't drink. I think the 3 beers there kind of tipped off that I wasn't telling the truth. I continued to bounce in and out of AA for the next 17 years. Every time I get in trouble, there was usually something about drinking, and I'd show up, and I'd get a white chip, and I used it as a get-out-of-jail-free card. You know, I mean, I think, hey, I got a white chip. Oh, okay. I'm going to AA. Oh, okay. And they'd let me off the hook. You know, it was like magic. I mean, I don't know how many of you come in and out, but you get your white chip, you go home, you show the wife, hey, fine, you know. Instantly, I'm not going to drink anymore, boom, boom. 2 days later, you're drunk, but I got a white chip, by God. My uncle died with 17 years continuous sobriety. He had 7 years, and he went out one day and came back and got 7 more. And he was kind of a poobah in AA in Pennsylvania. And he was visiting, and I happened to just be getting out of trouble. And I went up to him, and he's talking to my father, and I had the white chip. I said, Uncle Joe, I got a white chip. And he didn't even break in the conversation. He just kept right on going. And so I got a little closer and spoke a little louder and said, Uncle Joe, I got a white chip. And he still didn't. And I finally shoved it right in his face. I said, I got a white chip. And he looked at me and he said, If you wanted a white chip, your dad's got like 70 of them upstairs in the drawer. You're going to go and take him one of those. And I was insulted. He said, don't show me a white chip, show me what you're doing. It doesn't matter what colored chip you got, it matters what you're doing. You got another resentment. All that lasted until October 7th, 1985, and I was summoned to the office of the Bishop of the Diocese of Maryland, where I was an Episcopal priest in a small parish down on the Chesapeake Bay. Now, I knew there was only two reasons that they would want to see me Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And one was to congratulate me on the absolutely spectacular job I was doing at this little dumpy parish they'd stuck me in. And the other was that there was some thorny theological question that was threatening Western civilization that only a brilliant mind like mine could help them solve. There was a third thing that I hadn't even realized. And as I walked through the door of the office of the bishop, I knew immediately I was about to become the victim of an intervention. The reason I knew that was that there sitting in the room along with some other people were two of the three Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionists in the Diocese of Maryland. And I knew that they were two of the three Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionists in the Diocese of Maryland because I was the third Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionist. And, you know, there are people who are sober today who claim that I helped them start and I was drunk when I did it. Well, you know, some people serve as an example, some people serve as a warning. You know. Now, I'll tell you, I know this process. I've been through this process 50 times or more. And I know the process. And I know that when I walk in there, there is a bed at the drunk farm, and I'm going to be in it that day. No negotiation, nothing. And I am going to negotiate. And I look around the room and I say, well, if you think I'm drinking too much, I can always cut back. And one of the other interventionists laughed so hard he almost wet himself. Shook his head, and I said, well, I guess I could quit altogether for a while. And they shouldn't. And I said, well, I pull out the big guns. I guess I could go back to A&A and get my white chip and get out of jail free card. And they just said, no. So they put me in the car. And off I went. I thought about it for like 15 minutes. I weighed my options. And it was 11 o'clock, and I'd had my last drink at 7:15 in the morning. And if you're the kind of drunk I am, and you have now gone, close to 4 hours without a drink, you got that feeling down in your stomach that you know you're going to turn into a human vibrator in about 2 minutes. And I knew that there is a time-honored tradition in Alcoholics Anonymous that if you take somebody to the drunk farm, you got to stop and get them their last drink. And so I basically went to rehab in order to get a drink. And we stopped and we got me something to drink. And I got to the rehab and I was okay. I was just fine. And I knew that these were professional people, and it would only take them 2 or 3 days to figure out that these were well-meaning but terribly misinformed folks and let me go home. 36 days later, in a 28-day treatment program, I was allowed to leave. I was such a good patient, they let me stay an extra week. And I got in the car from my ride, and I looked at it. It was my wife at the time. And I said, you don't really think I'm an alcoholic? I've been locked up in the drunk farm for the third time, this time for 36 days, and I'm saying, you don't really think I'm an alcoholic? Now, I don't know what happened different at that one or any of the other ones or the Nut Huts or any of the other places I've been. I know the one thing that was different was that the people of Alcoholics Anonymous in Annapolis, Maryland, where I was living at the time, were sick and tired of me stealing their white chips. And there was a meeting, evidently, after a meeting of several old-timers. And the topic of the meeting I hear was, what are we going to do with the drunk priest? And the answer was, we'll find the meanest, nastiest, ugliest human being in Alcoholics Anonymous in Annapolis, Maryland, and we'll force him to be his sponsor. And I don't know who they punished worse, me or him, but they got both of us. He called me. I couldn't leave the rehab till I called him. We talked a little bit. He was not impressed. His comment was he didn't know who I was. I was shocked. His one comment was, "Are you that drunk priest they stuck me with?" The last comment he made was, "Okay, when are you getting out?" And I said, "Thursday." He said, "Good, we'll go to the noon meeting." I said, "Well, I don't know when I'm going to get home from here." And he said, "Okay, I'll pick you up at 7. We'll go to the Birdsville meeting." I said, "Bob, the Birdsville meeting is 5 minutes from my house." He says, "Yeah, I'll pick you up at 7. Click. At 7 o'clock that Thursday evening, there was a knock on my door, and there stood my new sponsor. Now, I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous long enough to know some things about sponsors and sponsorship. And the reality is that you have to have a sponsor who's simpatico with you, who you have some connection with, somebody of similar background and taste and interest and education. And you know, now I know I don't look like much now because I'm short. But when I got here, I was a lot taller and I was somebody. I have degrees from a number of prestigious universities. I have done postgraduate study in Europe. I have testified before both houses of Congress. I have had an article done on me on the front page of the religion section of the Washington Post, above the fold, as the hip young priest in D.C. I'm somebody. There stood my new sponsor. Bob Terry stood 5'6" tall. He weighed 220 pounds. There was not an ounce of fat on him. He had biceps the size of my thighs. He had slick back hair. He had bad dental work, and he had tattoos head to foot. And in 1985, I didn't do tattoos. He was an 11th grade dropout, and he was a firefighter. He looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Get in the car." I said, "Don't you want to meet the family?" He said, "I'll talk to them when they're not around." He had this old whiskey, raspy voice. He said, "Get in the car." I looked out in my driveway. Now, I am a priest. I am the rector of a parish on the Chesapeake Bay. I live in a nice neighborhood with decent human beings. And I have a reputation. And I thought it was good at the time. There in my driveway was a 1967, mostly Bondo colored, some blue, Mercury automobile. And my first thought is, I got to get him out of here before my neighbors see. And so I scurry to the car, I go around to the passenger side, find out the door doesn't work. Now, any decent human being would just slide in the driver's side. Not my sponsor. You came in through the window. It's like some damn Beatles song. Got in the car, he started it up, he backed out of the driveway, and I found out that the most interesting facet of that vehicle was that the passenger seat was not attached to the body of the car. So he went backwards, I went forwards, he went forwards, I went backwards. I have not had a drink in 38 days. I am in the death trap of an automobile going to an AA meeting early. I am not happy. I did not arrive here and say, "Thank God I'm home." I arrived here and said, "Thank God I'm alive." We got there at 7:05, just like I told him we would. We beat the coffee makers there. We sat in the parking lot. We talked. Well, he talked, I tried to talk. He cared less what I had to say. Finally, he said, "Well, I'm working on my 4th step." He said, "Not anymore." I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Not anymore. I'm your new sponsor." I said, "Well, what am I doing?" He said, "You're working on step 1A. I said, "Powerless over alcohol?" He said, "No." I said, "What's 1A? He said, "It's the one that comes before 1. I said, "Well, what step's that?" He said, "Get in the car." For the next 3 months, that's the step I worked every night. Get in the car, get in the car. We go to the meeting. As I'm walking in, he grabs me. He says, "If anybody accidentally calls on you in there, you tell them who you are and what you are." I said, "I don't know what that means." He said, "Who you are is Mike, what you are is an alcoholic." I said, "Oh," he said, "the next words out of your mouth are, 'I need to listen.'" I said, you mean you want me to pass?" He said, no, you never pass an A. You say, I need to listen. I said, why would I say that? He said, because you need to listen, stupid. I said, well, suppose I have something to say. He said, we don't care. He said, anything out of your mouth's a lie. I'm a priest. I don't lie. We go to the meeting, we help set up, we do all that kind of stuff. He sits on this side. There's a guy who's about 8'6" and has a fresh knife scar across his face, in case I decide I'm going to say something. Got in the car. He pulled out of the parking lot. I flew into the back seat. Go zooming past my street. I go, Bob, I think you missed the turn. He said, nah, we're going to Denny's. Denny's. I am personally acquainted with the head chef at Le Leon d'Or 5-star restaurant in the Watergate Hotel. I can walk in there off the street anytime, day or night, and get a table. And I'm going to Denny's with Bob and his tattooed friends. And they sit us in the corner booth where all the windows are, so if anybody knows me can walk past and see me with Bob and his tattooed friends. They talk. I tried to talk. Nobody cared less what I had to say. 11 o'clock or so, we leave Denny's. Every night, get in the car, go to a meeting, go to Denny's, talk to the tattooed friends, leave at 11 o'clock. After about 3 months of this nonsense, I'm thinking, doesn't this man have a family? And then I'm thinking, well, if you were his family, you wouldn't want him around either. And so then I figured, hey, I'm doing Al-Anon service work, keeping him out at night. One night we leave Denny's about 10 of 11. I don't know why we left early. And he drove me home, and as we drove home, we made the right-hand turn 2 blocks from my house where the liquor store was. And the guy was turning off the light, the Budweiser light, closing up. And I knew why we went to Denny's every night at 11 o'clock, till 11 o'clock. And I turned to Bob, and I looked at him with that look that all pigeons give their sponsor, and that's, I know what you're doing. And he looked at me with that kind, loving sponsor look and said, that's okay, Mike, I don't like you either. And he didn't, because I wasn't likable. But he loved a drunk enough to give up every night of his week and keep me out so I didn't drink. He continued to embarrass me for the next 10 months. I found a dime on the table, cleaned it up once. He made me go to everybody in the room and ask if they lost a dime. You know, I said, what, nobody lost a dime? He said, bring it back next week. Announcement time, he elbowed me and said, see if anybody lost a dime. I said, what? I'd stand up and say, anybody lose a dime last week? Nobody lost a dime. I said, what do I do now? He said, put it in the basket. I said, why? He said, because it's not your dime. Yeah, he knew that if I could take a dime, I could take $1. If I could take $1, I could take 10. If I take 10, I can take 100. I take 100, I'll take a drink. You know, I tried to talk once. I studied up on what I was going to say. You know, I practiced in front of the mirror so I'd sound smart. It was on the 5th step. I knew that because we'd done 4 the week before and we were doing 6 the next week. And I read Augustine's Preparation for Confession, for God's sakes, which is a real page turner. And I had my little thing, and we came around to my time. I said, well, some of you know I'm a priest, and I didn't get that far. I said, well, my name's Mike, I'm an alcoholic. And some of you know I'm a poo. And from across the room came the melodious voice of my sponsor, that's a lie! And I froze. And I slid, the room went silent. And I slid down my chair and tried to hide in the shag carpet. And all I could think to say on the way down is, and I need to listen. Yeah, they all laugh too, you know. We don't laugh at the newcomers, but we laugh real near them, by God. 10 months sober. I was not working a program. I was lying to Bob. I was pretending to do the steps. I was writing down what I thought he wanted to hear. I was telling him what I thought he wanted to hear. I was pretending. I hadn't had a drink. I didn't have a program. And I was going crazy. I was absolutely insane. And I knew I was going to drink, kill myself, or kill a large number of other people. I liked option 3 best. Blow up the Bay Bridge on a holiday weekend. Now, if you're just here trying to get by, you get a get out of jail free card, like my friend Harold says, if you got back problems, you want your wife back, your job back, your license back, your car back, and when you get them back, you don't have to come back. If you're just here for that kind of thing, don't ever do this. I made a terrible mistake. I told my sponsor the truth. And after I laid out this horrible tale of woe, he looked at me and he said in his charming voice, well, I guess life will just unfold as it unfolds. And I was petrified of this man. I was scared to death because he threatened physical violence on a regular basis. If you don't do this, I'm going to break your kneecaps. And I grabbed him by the shirt collar. I said, you don't seem to understand. I'm going to kill somebody, and you just move to the top of the list. Not that he had very far to go to get there. And he knocked my hands away, and he said, well, what do you want out of me? And I said, well, you're so smart. Why don't you tell me what to do? And he looked me straight in the face and said, why don't you join Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, what do you think I've been doing for 10 months? He said, visiting. He was absolutely correct. And I wish I could say I joined Alcoholics Anonymous at that point in time. But I waited another 2 months. And I woke up one night at 2 o'clock in the morning in the worst emotional pain I've ever been in my life. I was crying. I had no idea why, but I knew I was hurt. And I rolled out of bed and I knelt down at my bedside. I looked up at the ceiling and I said, dear God, please help me. And for the first time, and I've been ordained a priest at that time for 14 years. For the first time in my life, I clearly heard the voice of God in my head. And God said, why don't you join Alcoholics Anonymous? Who knew that God sounded like Bob or Bob sounded like God? But I got up that night and I went downstairs and I opened up the pages of Alcoholics, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the first time in, at that point, 18 years, I put myself in those pages. You see, up until that point in time in my life, I'd come into Alcoholics Anonymous and I'd taken my life and I'd taken the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and I tried to fit it into my life, and those parts that didn't get fit got trimmed off. And that night I decided to take the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that fit my life into it, and those parts that don't fit need to be trimmed off. 3 weeks later, Bob called me and we met, and he said, you got to find a new sponsor. And I said, why? And he said, well, I'm going to Florida for 4 months and to do some work on my house because he's getting ready to retire as a fireman and he was building a house down there. And I said, oh, well, we can just do the telephone thing. And he said, nah, as sick as you are, you need somebody to get their eyes on you at least 3 times a week to know how bad you're lying. And I said, well, gosh, Bob, I'm really sorry. And in my heart of hearts, I was going, thank you, Jesus, it's out of my life. He said, you can have any one of these 3 guys. He gave me 3 names. Well, I got 2 of them were just mean. They were as bad as Bob. And the 3rd guy was a California drunk. You know those California drunks? Oh, they're great. They're all spiritual and they're laid back and they're kind of, I'm not going to tell you what to do. We'll just walk together and figure this thing out. And this guy laughed a lot and kind of easy going and all kind of funky, crystal, new age spiritual stuff that I could just dismiss. I picked him, and within the first 5 minutes of our conversation, he turned into Bob Jr. Started calling me dummy and telling me he'd break my kneecaps and other stuff. But I was ready. And we went through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous again. In the first step, they taught me that I have a disease of perception. They taught me that the world's like this and my mind's like this. And when I drink, the world goes and it matches my mind. When I don't drink, there's cognitive dissonance, is what the psychologists call it, because things don't match up. When I drink, my perception of the world goes and everything matches and everything's fine. Well, Bill said, what we're going to do is we're going to move your mind so it matches, not try to move our perception of the world. Now that works, except my mind's like a rubber band. And it keeps going boing. And so I keep having to talk to my sponsor and work the steps and go to meetings and do all that kind of good stuff. So we keep readjusting it. And two, I was introduced to a God who I knew a lot about. I mean, I had a degree in God. I worked for God. I didn't have a relationship with him. You know, I could tell you what, Tommy Flynn came up to me once at the back of the 12 and 12, and he got up in my face and he said, I know you've taken the A course. And I said, what's the A course, Tommy? And he said, Aquinas, Augustine, Anselm, all those guys. I said, well, yes, I know something about those theologians. And he said, well, let me tell you what theology is in AA. And I said, what's that, Tommy? And he said, find God or die. Turned around and walked away. Got another resentment. What happened was that through that, I found a relationship with God. Turned my will and my life over to the care of that God. I did a 4-step. I wrote down stuff, and then I did a 5th step. I told a plumber something I wouldn't tell a $250 an hour psychiatrist, for God's sakes. 6, I decide if I'm entirely ready to have all my defects removed. That's hard. We gloss over that, but that's hard. We don't want our defects removed. At least I don't. I want them out of the way. I want them sort of tucked away somewhere where they won't show themselves and won't embarrass me. But if I need them, I can get to them. It's kind of like that shelf on top of the closet way up there. You got the stuff you don't want anybody to know you have, but you might need someday. And I want it available. Suppose I ask God to remove my anger. And I'm driving down Oak Street in Myrtle Beach, and some idiot from Ohio makes a left-hand turn from the right-hand lane and almost kills me. What am I supposed to do? And I go for my anger, and God's taken it away. What am I supposed to do? Well, have a nice day. You run them down. I don't want those. But what I had to be was ready to have them gone. So I could find a new way of life that doesn't deal with all the stuff, all the personality defects I had. Bob told me, in fact, if it wasn't for character defects, I wouldn't have character. And so I went to him once, we were doing 4-step, pretending to do a 4-step. I said, I have to put my assets down. And he said, you act like you have any. I don't. I didn't when I got here. I didn't have any character assets. I had shucking and jiving. I had pretending, but I didn't have any character assets. So I listened to them. I told somebody. I decided that they had to go. I prayed to God. And 7, I love 7. There's a huge loophole there in that prayer. You ever see it? Remove from me every defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. I obviously have some character defects that are useful to some of you or to God because they haven't gone away. But I know today that when I have a character defect, because I've asked God to remove it and he chose not to, it is a gift of God. And my job is to see how I could use it to help somebody else. That's an amazing concept. That's an amazing concept. I can sit down with somebody new in the program who says, I just can't control my anger. And I say, I know that one. Drive down the street in Oak Street with me for a while and we'll show you. It's a process. And 8, I made a list of all the people I'd done anything bad to, even though most of them deserved twice what they got. And 9, I went and told them, oh, I'm sorry. And I made amends. I tried to make it right. I continued to take personal inventory. There are several people today who are alive because I didn't want to have to do a 10th step. And in the back of your head, the little guy says, don't do that. You'll have to tell your sponsor, and then you're going to have to go and tell them you're sorry and make amends, and you don't like them anyway. I did that once. Honest God, I did that once. I read the Riot Act. I called him everything but a child of God. And I had to go back and make amends. And he thought I liked him, and he was my friend, and he followed me around to AA till I finally broke down and decided he was my friend and found out he wasn't as bad as I thought. He wasn't good, but he wasn't as bad as I thought. We're still friends today. God bless him. I try as best I can to improve my conscious contact with the God of my understanding on a daily basis. And as a result of a spiritual awakening, I found out some things. I found out that hole in my gut that we all talk about is there by design, not by defect. I tried to fill that up with everything I could. Money, success, notoriety, education, sex, drugs, rock and roll. I even tried to fill it up with God. You know why that hole's there? God told me this in AA. That hole's there so that the love of God that comes into my body can be spread out to other people. And you know, when it's going out from me to somebody else, I don't even notice it's there. And the minute I stop that and start thinking about Mike, and it doesn't come out, that hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the minute I start reaching out to somebody else, it goes away. As a result, I have an incredible life. I mean, I have been blessed beyond measure. I have been restored to a relationship in my profession and a sense of purpose and dignity. Today, when I'm invited to the bishop's office, it's not because I did something stupid and they want to yell at me. Mostly when I'm invited there, they ask me, what are we going to do with this other drunk priest? And my answer is always, just take him out in the field and shoot him. It'll just be easier for everybody. I've been restored to a relationship with my family. I have a bunch of kids. They all have come back. Now one of them has left. I love him to pieces. If he doesn't drink before December 21st, he'll have 9 years. He's been to 2 meetings in 4 years. He's on the worst dry drunk I've ever seen in my life. And I want to kill him. But he's just a drunk trying to get sober as best he can. And hopefully things will get bad enough that he'll come back before he drinks again. But I mean, I'll tell you a quick Robert story. Robert's my middle child. He's number 3 out of 5. And he was the worst affected by my alcoholism and by my sobriety. I mean, I was a bad father drunk. I was a lethal father the first 2 years I was sober. I was awful. You know, I'd go to AA and they'd slap me on the back and, how's it going? Oh, it's going great. I love it. Wonderful life. Just adore AA, everything. I'd come home, drop kick the dog across the living room rug and chase my kids with knives and baseball bats because I didn't like the way they said thank you. And he was terribly negatively affected by that. But I did a bunch of nice steps with him and some stuff. And when we got to the point where we could be civil to each other, we could be in the same room. But we never were close. I mean, he'd call, we'd talk about baseball or something in AIM, and then he'd get his mother on the phone and he'd talk to her because she raised him and he trusted her. I'm 16 years sober in the program. For a year, 18 months sober, he tries to kill me. And I don't mean he got mad and tried to do something. He planned out how to kill me. And it was not an unreasonable decision. He believed the only way his brothers and his mother could have, and he could have any peace, is if I was gone and dead. And he planned it out, and he tried it, and he barely missed. And I'm glad he did, not because I deserve to live, but I don't want him to have to deal with the guilt of killing me. But honestly, if he had succeeded and the truth been told at the trial, about 10 to 15 minutes in it, the jury would have stood, applauded, and asked him what took him so long, and then awarded him a medal for admirable homicide, not even justifiable. But there was a distance between us. I'm 16 years sober. I'm speaking on panels. I'm doing spiritual retreats. I'm a humble spiritual giant in Alcoholics Anonymous, by God. And Robert calls, and I answer the phone, and he says, we talk a little bit. I said, Mom's at the grocery store. I'll have her call you when you get back. Robert says, well, actually, I called to talk to you. I went, really? Now, my first thought, humble spiritual giant, is, oh, my God, this is going to cost me money. And I said, well, what can I do? He said, well, I have a situation in my life, and I'd like your input. And he told me what it was, and I shared my experience, strength, and hope, because I can't give advice. And he said, listen, I got some time off, and I got mass time off at my job, and they're going to make me take some, so I thought I'd come down and see you. And I said, oh, that'd be great, your mother and I'd love to see you, and please come. He said, well, actually, I'd like to come down to Myrtle Beach and meet you there, because we had this house at Myrtle Beach. That's one of the gifts of sobriety. And I said, oh, we'd love to come. Your mother and I could come down, and we'd just love to hang out with you at Myrtle Beach. And he said, well, that'd be nice. I'd like to play golf with you. And I said, oh, your mother and I would like to play golf. And he said, you don't understand, do you? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I want to come visit you, and I want to play golf with you. 14 and a half years before that, he wanted to kill me. He told me later he had finally decided there was a good chance I wasn't going to drink again. 16 years sober. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the whole wide world but here. I'm going to go over a little bit. I'll tell you the rest of the story. May 7th, 2005, the pain in Robert's life became so great he found it necessary to take his own life and the life of 2 other people. Worst day of my life. Picked up the telephone, and the policeman told me they found his body. Now, I've sat where you sat, and I've heard all the horrible stories that people go through and stay sober. And I've said, well, I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm glad it didn't happen to me because I drank. Most amazing thing happened. I did not drink. I didn't even think about a drink. First thought that came into me as I hung up from the police officer was, how do I help his mother, his brothers, his grandparents, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles, and his friends get through this? The first thought that came into my head was, how can I be of service to the other people affected by this tragedy? And the strangest part was, the more I affected that, the more I did that, the more I healed. I didn't talk about it for a year behind the podium. First time I talked about it, I told the Robert story about getting back together, and that's where I always stopped. And some little guy in the back of my head that you put there and I didn't invite said, you got to tell the rest of it. And I did. I got down and I stood there, and people come up and shake your hand, and they're very nice and gracious and tell you you did a nice job. And there's a little lady sort of standing in the back, and the line gets down, and she gets in the line at the back, and people come up, and she gets out. And obviously, she wants to be the last person to talk to me. She comes up and she grabs my hand, and she says, thank you for telling your story. I said, you're more than welcome. She said, my daughter killed herself 2 weeks ago, and I don't know what to do. And I told her what Terry C. told me to get me through it. And I passed it on because Terry had lost a child in sobriety. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from her. And she thanked me again for telling her what Terry T.C. told me, and said it was getting a little bit better. Robert's death got redeemed that day because I could use it to help somebody else. Had it been my thought, it would have been, let's go out and get drunk because our son killed 2 other people and himself. The thought you put in my head was, how can I help? That's the beauty of this program. That's what you people have done to me. 34 years ago, well, actually 33 years ago, I turned my will and my life over to the care of God and my understanding. And he was busy doing something else. I don't know what. It's probably important. And so he subcontracted the job to you all. I'm here to report tonight that you're doing a real fine job. Always end with the same joke. 2 men drinking in a bar in Alaska. One was a very religious man. One was an atheist. Atheist turned to the religious man and said, I don't believe in your God. Religious man said, why not? Atheist said, I gave your God a chance to prove himself, and he failed. Very religious man said, well, tell me about it. They said, well, about 3 months ago, I was stuck 150 miles north of town in a blinding snow blizzard. And I was going to die, and I was lost, and I didn't know what to do. And I knelt down in the snow, and I looked up at the sky and said, dear God, if you're there, please save me. Very religious man looks at me and says, surely you must believe you're here. Atheist said, no, some darn Eskimo came along and showed me the way back to town. 34 years ago, I was stuck in a blinding snow blizzard, 34 years ago, I was stuck in a blinding snow blizzard 150 miles north of town. If I didn't get help, I was going to die. And God sent an Eskimo by the name of Bob to show me the way back to town. And numerous times in my sobriety in the last 34 years, I've been stuck in that same snowstorm, same 150 miles in North Town, and every time God sent an Eskimo to drag my butt back to town and sit in a chair in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have any problems in your life, any difficulties, I will pray to God that you find an Eskimo. Watch out for somebody who says, get in the car. I believe in the power of prayer. Tonight when I kneel down at my bedside, I will ask the God of my understanding if each and every one of you can have 24 more hours of this life. If you happen to have a God of your understanding, if you happen to be in communication with that God anytime in the near future, and if you happen to remember it, I would deeply appreciate it if you ask the God of your understanding if I can have 24 more hours of this life, because I absolutely love it. Thank you all very much for 12-stepping me one more time tonight.